Great news for every Fuji shooter. Sigma, a third-party lens company, is finally bringing their amazing design for APS-C lenses to the Fuji X-mount. They're going to give you autofocus, auto exposure, and we're going to test the image quality for them. I wanted to compare these against the original Fuji lenses, but I didn't have them all. So what I did was I went to KEH and bought them for myself. You can use the link here and the coupon code for an extra 5% off. Chelsea and I buy and sell a lot of gear. It's a great way to be able to try things out, and I always start at KEH. If you decide you want to upgrade, you can always sell them your gear and use our code to get an extra 5% bonus. I find it cheaper to buy and sell used from KEH than even to rent, especially because I often end up wanting to keep it. Look at that lens, technically used, but in perfect condition and absolutely no risk since I could return it or send it back within the warranty period for repair. Check out our sponsor KEH whenever you're shopping, and when you have old gear laying around, give it a new life by selling it to them. These codes will give you a 5% coupon and a 5% bonus when you decide to sell. Thanks KEH. Now I'm gonna run through the lineup of the lenses, and then we're gonna get into the technical image quality. We're gonna be testing everything: sharpness, contrast, bokeh, well, everything except one thing, and that is autofocus. Because right now, these Sigma lenses don't have their final firmware. They're still working out the autofocus, and that can actually be a concern. I've tested Sigma and other third-party lenses against OEM on other platforms, and I often find that the third-party lenses don't autofocus quite as good, but it remains to be seen. So be sure to subscribe. I'll test the autofocus on this soon, and click those notifications. Starting with a wide angle, this is the Sigma 16mm f1.4 versus the Fuji 16mm f1.4. I've owned this Sigma for both Canon and Sony platforms. It's fantastic for APS-C vlogging and astrophotography, but I've also loved my Fuji 16mm for a long time. I love the feel of it. It's all metal. It's very compact, and you can see quite a bit smaller than the Sigma lens. It also has a actual physical aperture ring, which for me is kind of a must-have. Switching between manual and autofocus is very cool because it's done with this clutch where you pop it down and then you can manually focus. And that is one of my biggest gripes with all these Sigma lenses, is they didn't provide the physical aperture dial. That's really my favorite thing about using Fuji, because I shoot Fuji cameras like the X-T4, like the X Pro here, because I love the tactile feel, because that experience is really part of it for me. So it's a little bit of a letdown. Let me show you something. This is also a Sigma lens, but it's the Sony mount 20mm f2, and it's a newer model, but it has the physical aperture ring and that great design. And in fact, it feels a lot like a Fuji lens. I kind of wish Sigma had given me this design when they ported these over to the X-mount. If you're an X Pro shooter, there might be another concern. Let's see how much of the optical viewfinder is blocked by each of the lenses. This is the Fuji 16mm lens, and this is the Sigma 16mm lens. It does poke a little more in the frame, but it doesn't much bother me. Now let's move on to 30-35mm, what's considered normal in the APS-C format. That means these lenses provide you the standard field of view that's similar to what the human eye sees. This is the new Sigma here, and this is the Fuji 35. We see the same design differences. The Sigma is quite a bit bigger, and the Fuji has the physical aperture ring here that lets you get your settings in order without even looking at a screen. There is already a third-party lens in this segment, and it's the Viltrox 33mm. And as you can see, it also has a physical aperture ring. It's bigger than the Fuji, a little bit smaller than the Sigma. Let's look at them on the X Pro again. This is the Fuji 35mm. This is the Sigma 30mm. And this is the Viltrox 33mm. Now let's move on to the portrait lenses. These are 56mm f1.4 lenses. Here the Sigma is significantly smaller than the old Fuji lens, but again, the Fuji has that nice aperture ring. Let's get a quick look through the viewfinder of the X Pro. This is the Fuji 56mm f1.2, and this is the Sigma 56mm f1.4. Now the bigger question, how do each of these perform? I'm going to be testing all of them with my Fujifilm X-T4, the current flagship with the highest image quality. Let's see how they do. Now I'm going to test the sharpness of each of the lenses using a fixed studio scene here. I'm putting the camera, an X-T4, on a tripod with a delayed shutter to be sure to eliminate any camera shake. I'm using single autofocus to very carefully focus on the books. First comparing the Fuji 16 to the Sigma 16mm wide open at f1.4. If we just look at the histogram in the right corner here, this is the Fuji and this is the Sigma. You can see the Sigma is about 1/3 of a stop brighter. While the f-stops are the same, the Sigma's t-stop is about 1/3 of a stop faster, meaning you'll get about 1/3 less noise when shooting in low light. Let's zoom in and compare the details. It's close, but there's definitely more detail from the Sigma lens. In the corners along the focal plane, the difference is even more pronounced. The Sigma is significantly sharper. Also notice just how much darker the corners in the Fuji are. It has some pretty serious vignetting. So this is a win for the Sigma. I love to use the wide-angle fast primes for astrophotography, so I took the 16mm out and photographed the stars. Here, check the histogram. Again, as I switch between these, the Sigma's t-stop advantage really is useful because it's just gathering more light, which means we'll produce less noise. Let's equalize the exposure in post. Zooming in near the center, we can see the Fuji lens gets a little smeary. There's some artificial colors introduced. Compare how each lens renders this star near the center of the frame. Also notice how much more noise is visible in the Fuji lens. The Sigma lens 1/3 of a stop t-stop advantage produces noticeably cleaner images and thus is significantly better for astrophotography. Let's check the corner of the image. Both lenses get a little squirrely near the corners, but you can see the Sigma is significantly better than the Fuji, which is just going crazy. For astro, definitely choose the Sigma. Now let's compare the Sigma 30 to the Fuji 35. Here the t-stops seem pretty similar. Notice that the focal length is slightly different, so they're going to be a different scale as we zoom in. We see a little more detail from the Fuji, though it is a longer focal length. However, we see some really bad magenta fringing in areas of contrast here, so the Sigma's optical quality seems overall better. At the edges of the frame, the Sigma is noticeably better. Look how the Fuji fills this black edge in with magenta. That's not present on the Sigma lens. Let's compare the other third-party lens, the Viltrox 33, to the Sigma. We can see right away the Viltrox is significantly darker. Its t-stops are much worse, giving you about half a stop less low-light performance. Let's zoom in. Oh, this Viltrox lens is so bad. Look at the terrible edges here. I double checked to make sure the lens didn't have anything smeared on it, but it's in absolutely perfect shape. This just seems to be the quality of the lens. Look at this edge here. Why does it make that magenta? Terrible. At the edges of the frame, like, look at that. It's all smeared up. This Viltrox lens is bad. Now let's compare the two 56mm lenses. Note that the 56mm Fuji goes to f1.2, but I'm keeping it at f1.4, which gives it a little edge since it's shut down a little bit. The Sigma at f1.4 does have a better t-stop. You can see it's a little brighter, but the Fuji would clearly win in low light since it would open up another half a stop or so. Right away, the Sigma looks significantly better. Look at the terrible magenta fringing in all areas of contrast. The Sigma lens is also just sharper and more detailed. At the edges of the frame, the Fuji just gets weird. Look at this weird ghosting. Yuck. In the real world, I noticed the Sigma's bokeh was a little smoother, and if you zoomed in, the eyelashes were noticeably crisper. Though I'm not testing autofocus, the Sigma was actually a little more accurate on average than the Fuji. So far for optical quality, the three Sigma lenses win. In the real world, you won't see such extreme differences between these lenses because things like subject motion, camera shake, atmospheric conditions will reduce the relative sharpness. I'm also shooting each lens wide open as fast as the slowest lens in a set can go, because that is where we see the greatest differences. As we shut the aperture down, diffraction always lowers the sharpness, and thus at f22, you would probably see no apparent difference. Shooting it wide open, which is really the most important setting, exaggerates the differences. And now I'm in our portrait photography studio to test out contrast and bokeh. Contrast is important because often you're shooting into the sun. You could just be shooting a sunset, or you might be a portrait photographer with the sun behind your subject so you don't have the sun shining in their faces. Different lenses handle this completely differently. A lot will get really, really washed out in any sort of backlighting. And you can work around that, but you have to be aware of it, and it also limits your options. So now I'm going to test out that heavy backlighting situation by setting up a strobe and firing it behind our very still model. This will also allow us to see the amount of chromatic aberration that's happening around the backlit hairs. And I have some Christmas lights set up in the background so we can get a sense for the bokeh, at least on the 56mm lens. Again, starting with the 16mm and the Fuji on the left, we can see without even zooming in that the Sigma lens has retained much more contrast in the face in this backlit scenario. The optics in the Fuji lens are just bouncing this light all around, washing out the entire image. This makes a difference in any contrasty scene, not just extreme test scenarios like this. Zooming in though, I see some pretty rough chromatic aberration from the Sigma that I don't see on the Fuji. This magenta fringing could be a portrait ruiner. You can remove a lot of this in post, but you're gonna have to put some time into it. Shooting into the sun with the aperture shut down creates an interesting starburst effect. The Sigma starburst has more spokes, and the spokes are more evenly spaced. Again, with the normal lenses, the Fuji on the left is very washed out. The Sigma handles contrast so much better. Look how washed out this shot is on the Fuji. The flaring made the mannequin's skin look green. Let's zoom in on the hair. I see some pretty bad chromatic aberration from both of them, but the Sigma's at least stays mostly magenta, while the Fuji's goes to both green and magenta. For landscape photographers, the starburst from the Sigma on the right is much cleaner than the Fuji on the left. Now let's look at the Viltrox. It actually seems like it has better contrast than the Fuji. The Viltrox handles the chromatic aberration pretty well too, so while sharpness is bad, it's better in other optical ways. The great contrast on the Sigma really stands out here. The fringing on the Viltrox is okay, but we do see some magenta and green, and it's worse than the Sigma. These two lenses are about the same price, so you should definitely get the Sigma over the Viltrox. Now let's compare the 56mm lenses. Again, these are both at f1.4, and even shut down a little bit, the Fuji contrast is awful. I've experienced this firsthand just trying to take portraits with the Fuji. Stuff gets washed out if there's any backlighting at all. Zoom in on the eye here and look, this portrait is just a complete loss. The Sigma is so much more controlled. This just gives you the option to shoot in a wider variety of scenarios. The Fuji 56 also handles the chromatic aberration just poorly. So much green here and magenta too that you'd have to edit out, while the Sigma pretty controlled overall. In the second round of testing, again, the Sigma wins across the board for optical quality. One way the Fuji 16mm wins is in maximum magnification. You can get much closer than you can with the Sigma. Comparing to 30 and 35mm, the maximum magnification is about the same. The Viltrox 33 actually has the best magnification of the three lenses. The Sigma's portrait lens has much better magnification. Comparing bokeh on the 16mm lenses, the Fuji bokeh has some texture and hard edges with odd colors. The Sigma's bokeh looks a little bit better. Comparing the Fuji 35 and the Sigma 30, I actually like the Fujifilm's bokeh better here. The Sigma has some ugly edges and kind of an odd shape. The bokeh on the Viltrox is bad and should be ashamed of itself. Comparing the 56mm lenses, I see a lot of uneven texture on the Fuji 56, probably because the glass isn't quite as perfect as the Sigma lenses, which have a little bit of texture, but it's not too bad. So which lens should you get? I can confidently say, not the Viltrox. The Viltrox kind of sucks. It feels cheap and flimsy in the hand. Even the aperture ring doesn't feel good. This is actually one of the worst lenses we've ever tested. Fortunately, I bought it from KEH. That means I have 21 days to return it. And I am going to do that. Thanks KEH for being a great sponsor. The results were pretty consistent for the other three lenses. The Sigma lenses always had better optical image quality, but the Fuji lenses, oh, they just feel better. They look better. And listen to that click. Oh, that physical aperture ring, it's so satisfying to use. Which you get depends on how you use your gear. See, my wife Chelsea and I, we're polycameras. We use different cameras for different situations. If I'm on a professional portrait shoot and I plan to make big prints, I'd probably use a Canon R5 or a Sony Alpha 1. The times when I pick up my X-T4 and my X Pro 3 are some of my favorite times though. They're when I'm having fun, when I'm with my family, when I'm on vacation, or when I'm just alone and I want to enjoy the experience of photography. In those situations, I know these little clicks mean more to me than a little chromatic aberration or lack of sharpness. But if you're a professional photographer, a serious photographer, somebody making big prints, somebody selling your work, you should right now sell your Fuji lenses to KEH. You can use this coupon code to get a 5% bonus, and then buy the Sigma lenses because the results are genuinely better. Let's wrap this up in the studio. Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe so you can see the follow-up video where I test the autofocus capabilities of these Sigma lenses with final release products, as well as future camera tutorials, post-processing tutorials, and of course, camera and lens reviews. And thanks to our sponsor, KEH, who makes this possible. You know, we've never accepted money or free gear from any camera or lens manufacturer. That's why we can bring you these unbiased reviews. We're one of the few big YouTube channels that can still say this. KEH is one of the ways that this is possible. By shopping at KEH, you help to support this channel. You help to give used gear a new life. Be sure to check out KEH at this link when you're shopping and this link when you're selling. And for an extra 5% off, use this coupon code. And for a 5% bonus, use this coupon code. Those are also available in the description. Thanks so much, KEH. Bye.